Now I see your desktop.
All right. I'm gonna do this and that. Beginning.
And you're going to record this, right?
I just started the recording now. And all right. Is that good for you guys?
Will work, yeah.
Okay. All right. right. All right. All right. Do we want to wait a few more minutes, or do you want to get started?
We can go ahead if you would like. That'd be great.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, hello everyone. I'm going to now do. There's a little introduction that starts this presentation, then we'll get right into the main topic all came to here. All right, and then of course we'll have questions. It is being recorded. It's the first time I've ever done a recording of a webinar in this format, so hopefully it all works well, but it says it is being recorded. So, all right, I'm going to now turn my camera off, and we will begin, hopefully. I'm not talking.
Oh.
Were you able to hear the music?
Oh.
Music accompanies. So the first thing, can you hear me though, my voice?
Yeah, we can hear the voice.
Okay. All right. So I apologize the music wasn't working because there's supposed to be music accompanying that whole little intro. Would have probably made a little more sense, not staring at a blink at a screen without anything going on sound-wise. So the reason why I do the practice that I do is because, of course, my brother Mitch, and he has a disability. And we'll talk more about him as time goes on. He lives during this presentation. He lives in a group home. And he comes in once a week and does some shredding for office. You can see from that picture there. He was the best man at my wedding. So that's my brother Mitch. And I have a video. You probably can hear the audio though. Let's see here. Well, I'm presuming you couldn't hear that. Olympics won a medal, and he hasn't in the past. My father would always bring a medal with him, so if he won a ribbon, he can do a quick switch and give him a medal for Special Olympics. Anyways, I want to talk a little bit about growing up as a sibling. All right, and please let me know if you can. I want to make sure that you guys can still hear me. The audio again has not been working, but the microphone is. So always pause me if you have any issues with the audio. So growing up as a sibling, a little bit about that. You know, parents talk oftentimes about how it helps put things into perspective in life as a parent to have a child who has significant disabilities. As many of the parents in the room here that I'm speaking to, have that shared experience. Well, the sibling experience is different, of course. It's a different experience in a lot of ways. In one way, I'm a younger sibling. So my experience of having a sibling with disabilities has been my entire life. I've always had that knowledge of always having a sibling with special needs, and of course, with many of you, the traumatic brain injury may have occurred years later, years after birth, and so it may be a different kind of dynamic. But certainly with developmental disabilities, as I experienced it, my whole worldview is shaped by being a sibling, by having a brother with significant disabilities. Vacations are different. This is something that I'm sure many of you can attest to. It certainly can sometimes be an adventure to be on a vacation with your sibling with special needs, but it's certainly not a relaxing thing. And so that's something that we grew up with. One of the things my parents did several times during childhood is that my brother went to an overnight camp experience where he had a 2-week overnight camp program where he had a one-on-one aide, And that during that period of time, my parents took my sister and I, and we went to California one time. We went to New York the other time. And we had an opportunity to have a quote-unquote typical family vacation where the focus of the attention of both of my parents was on my sister and I, and not always on my brother. And us kind of being co-parents as well with my brother. And so that's something that, I always say is important. Whenever we get any opportunity, even if it's just one weekend or a day or an afternoon or something where you have opportunity to have one-on-one or two-on-one, if both parents can put all of their attention on one of the siblings, that's really healthy and good for the brothers and sisters for their own development and all of that. Trips to the grocery store is something that I still remember vividly. My brother would have a meltdown in the middle of the grocery aisle, and people would make comments, or they would, make faces. They would say things, and that's definitely stuck with me. And this was at a time, let's say the early 1990s, where awareness about autism was not as prevalent as it is today. So, of course, I'm hoping that the awareness about people having different brains working differently is now more common. But the biggest thing that as siblings we have, that we share really, is understanding of future responsibilities, knowing that it is very likely that at some point our brother or sister with special needs is going to outlive us. Excuse me, not outlive us, outlive our parents. May outlive us too, but certainly would outlive our parents in all likelihood. And so what's going to be down to us and our siblings, if we have other typical, quote unquote, typical siblings, to be there for them as an advocate, maybe as their guardian, maybe as a trustee of their special needs trust we'll talk about, but in some manner be there for them. So it's very important that siblings be part of the planning process. And we're about to talk about the special needs planning process. It's very important that siblings be involved in it because they're the ones who are going to be executing that plan when the parents are gone. And it's not good when it's a black box that they've never seen before. So I am the president of SIB, Supporting Illinois Brothers and Sisters, with the Illinois chapter of a national organization called the Sibling Leadership Network, where there is a resource for brothers and sisters that have a sibling with special needs. So highly encourage you to get, if you have other kids, and again, I'm assuming I'm mostly talking to parents here. If you have other children, you please get them involved. We have professionals in the room. If you can actually unmute yourselves down there, and if you can give me a sense of how many, of what percentage of the people that I'm speaking with are parents of individuals with disabilities, and how many are either siblings or professionals that serve people with disabilities, or some other category.
Okay, how many people are the parents of somebody with a disability? So
4, 6, 8 people with who are parents.
Okay, do we have any siblings? No.
No siblings.
Anybody here with a disability? Okay, so.
And there's about 4 people with a disability.
Okay. Any professionals that serve people with disabilities?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5.
Okay. All right. So it helps give me some sense of the audience. So again, for the parents and for the professionals to share with parents, about importance of involving siblings, and again, depending on the nature of the disabilities, the siblings may be there, in varying capacities, but they're certainly affected by the fact that they have a sibling with special needs, and they should have a place where they can feel welcome and feel like they fit in, if you will, and that's what SIBS is there for. There is the sibsnetwork.org, our website. There's also a national organization called siblingleadership.org for siblings nationally, where there is a resource for brothers and sisters that have a sibling with special needs. All right. So one of the, I believe they did print for you as well. And that PowerPoint, that information request form has a bunch of boxes to check for more information about different topics we're going to be talking about during this presentation tonight. And one of them is about sibling group information. There's also SIB shop information for younger siblings. So if we're talking about siblings who are, between the ages of 7 and 16, there's just social fun group activities that are organized for that, for siblings of those ages. Now, when we start talking about planning for the future of an individual who has some disabilities, one of the things to remember is that it's not just what mom and dad might do that could be a problem in terms of protection of government benefits. It's also what other people might do, okay? That could impact those very important government benefits, including especially grandparents and sometimes an aunt or uncle or even a sibling. One of the questions that people often ask us is how much is an individual with disabilities going to need for the rest of their lifetime? And it's impossible to come up with an exact amount because are you going to live? What investment for the rest of their lifetime? Whatever it is, where's it on paper? And we expect people with disabilities to work. That said, when parents are doing this planning, in most cases, they're going to say for the rest of their life, due to their disability, they may not be able to work full time and support themselves. But that's okay because tell us for their brother or sister with disabilities, but certainly not become a parental figure to their sibling or be financially responsible for them. Well, we have Uncle Donald. Idea what the next tweet might live. Illinois historically is amongst the worst states in the country in terms of funding for services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That said, there are some world-class programs out there in the state of Illinois, but funding from the state is down there with Mississippi and Alabama. It's just we're not a priority in the state of Illinois. But regardless of that, there are very important government benefits we have to protect. And the very base of any of this pyramid we want to build for an individual with disabilities is government benefits, because we don't want to do things that will interfere with, jeopardize, or reduce government benefits, which can be a crucial source of the support that they need to live as full and independent a life as possible. But if we have an inheritance directly to an individual with disabilities that are on most government benefit programs, they'll lose their benefits. So we have to leave those types of inheritances to special needs trusts. And there are one is for gifts and inheritances, and the other I'll talk more about a little bit later. And then they can work and still work and make some money and still not affect their benefits unless they earn too much money, which we'll talk about in just a second. First program I want to talk about is SSI. That's supplement. Okay, the test has not changed since 1971. It is still $2,000. All right, $2,000. That's all they're allowed to have in their name. Now, before age 18, they look at parents' assets and income, and so thank God most people do not qualify for this program. But the day that they turn 18, actually the first day of the calendar month after their 18th birthday, or of course if the disability occurred after age 18, then as soon as they are eligible and are disabled, that they cannot work and make, as we'll talk about, a certain amount per month, then they will look at the asset test, say, do they have $2,000 in their name? And if they don't, then they can qualify for benefits. When they apply, though, they will look back 3 years to see if they've ever had more than $2,000 in their name in the last 3 years. So giving the money away to mom and dad the day before they apply does not work. All right, so $2,000 asset test, that's the easy test to comply with. You either spend down the assets or you can move into that other kind of trust that I had mentioned, which we'll talk more about. But the income test is the disability test. This is really where the rubber meets the road, where it becomes most difficult to to actually get the benefits if you're not truly disabled. And they'll look at the ability to earn, in today's dollars, $1,220 in a month. Okay, as you see, it goes up with inflation each year. So they're going to say, could this individual earn $1,220 in a month? It's not like unemployment compensation. They're not going to say proof just you couldn't get a job. What they're going to do is they're going to look at if there's a diagnosis or listing level impairment. And then they're going to say because of that diagnosis or listing level impairment, which could include a cognitive disability or a very significant physical disability, they're going to say because of that, is that why they couldn't go get a job and earn $1,220 in a month? They're going to look at concentration, pace, persistence, appropriate social functioning, the ability to complete activities of daily living, like self-care, self-direction, mobility, things like that. Ability to understand, remember, apply information, interactions with others. They like to look at things like, could you sit and scan tickets at a movie theater 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? And what would get in the way of you doing that? So if you get through that, okay, and a lot of people do, it's, certainly if you have significant disabilities, people get through this. And you got to check maybe for $771 a month. As you see, it goes up each year with inflation. Now, I say maybe because if you don't charge rent or fair share of household expenses, if they're living rent-free at home with mom and dad or someone else is paying for their housing expenses, they reduce the amount they get from $771 down to $514 a month, okay? Now, you could charge rent. It's then taxable income to you. So some people don't want to do that. The other option is to say, I'm going to charge fair share of household expenses, which in your area is a little bit more, is easier to do than in some more expensive areas, because you're able to, the fair share of household expenses, when you include the real estate taxes, the utilities, the mortgage on the property, is oftentimes less than 771, depending on how many people are living in the house, of course. So if that share of household expenses divided by the number of people living there is less than 771, you could charge the amount that adds up to, and it's not taxable income to mom and dad. So that's a way to get basically the full 771 without paying taxes on the housing kind of contribution from the child with disabilities if they're living with mom and dad. Now, if the individual is still in school, and of course, under Illinois law, they could stay in school till day before 22, which is actually the minimum they have to do under federal law. Then if they could earn a lot of money, it won't affect their benefits. But if they earn more than $85,000 a month after age 22 or after they graduate high school, then after $85,000 a month, they lose 50 cents on the dollar for every dollar over that from their SSI. So if they earn $285,000 a month, the first 85 doesn't count. The next 200 will reduce their SSI by $100. So if they were getting 771, they'll be getting 671 if they're in that situation, and if they were getting 514, they'll be getting 414. All right. Now SSI is great, but SSDI is also an important program for many, many people. Social Security Disability Insurance is a program that people may be more familiar with than SSI. It's the program that every person who's ever paid enough quarters into the system, worked enough years, is eligible for if they become disabled at any time during their life. So an individual with disabilities, if they have sufficient quarters, can actually get an SSDI check. Before age 24, you'll need 6 quarters of work, which is in today's dollars $13.60, and a year gives you a quarter credit. Double that in a year, 2 quarters credit. You can earn up to 4 quarters in a year. It doesn't have to be in a certain 3-month period. It's just over the course of a calendar year. You have to earn that minimum amount, and you get a quarter worth of credit. Now, if they get sufficient quarters, if the individual, when they become disabled, let's say, had sufficient quarters, and as you get older, it takes more than 6 quarters, then they get a small check from SSDI based on their work history. If they worked a lot of years, they get a big check from SSDI. And if that check is more than 771, they will only get an SSDI check. If the check is less than that 771 amount, they'll get 2 checks, a check from SSI and a check from SSDI. Now, there's another way to get Social Security Disability Insurance, and this is the way that my brother gets Social Security Disability Insurance, because his work history is very small, with a job coach earning maybe $150 a month at most. So he's a DAC, disabled adult child. So that means that he was deemed disabled before age 22. So if an individual is deemed disabled before age 22, the easiest way to do that is to get SSI before age 22. Then when a parent goes on a Social Security retirement, disability, or passes away, the individual with disabilities gets to go on the parent's work record and get a lot more money. It's based on the parent's Social Security record. So to give you an idea, the more money the individual makes, the parent, let's say in this case, makes, and it could be even in certain cases a step parent in certain situations, or just the biological parents, whoever has the highest work record, they go onto that parent's record. When they take Social Security retirement, disability, or pass away, again, hopefully just retires. So this could be many years away for many parents, depending on your age. But when you take retirement, that's what triggers the child going on an SSDI on the parent's record. The amount they could be getting, again, is based on the parent's work history. The more money that the parent is entitled to in Social Security retirement, the more money that the child is entitled to. And the parent still gets their full check. It's an add-on. The amount that I've seen a child get on a parent's record has ranged from $700 or $800 a month, all the way to a parent that's worked full-time for 30 years, all the way to $2,600 a month. So it's a big range depending on how much and how long and how much the parent earned during their work years. Now, if they get even $1 of SSDI on their own work history, or because they're now a DAC, disabled child, on a parent's work record, it starts a 2-year clock to them getting Medicare, all right, which is pretty good health insurance, and they're far from 65, and they get that Medicare card. So that's great. They can have it for the rest of their life. And Medicare could either become their primary insurance, or it could be a secondary insurance after a private health insurance plan or an employer group health plan under the parent's record, under the parent's health insurance. SSDI and Medicare don't care about assets. An individual with disabilities could have $10 million in their name and qualify for SSDI and Medicare. However, two things. Number one, if the individual is going to be living residentially, like my brother lives in a group home, 24/7 support, he doesn't keep my father's Social Security, the DAC status, disabled adult child Social Security check on my father's record that's worth over $2,000 a month, I'm guessing. We don't know, because it all goes to the agency, and all but $60 a month goes there, and the agency gets less from the state. So basically, the state benefits from my father's work history and my brother's check on that work history. My brother only sees $60 a month. There is actually pending legislation in Springfield to increase this so that he would be getting 15% of his Social Security check that he would be getting otherwise, but I don't know that it's going anywhere. So all he gets to keep is $60 a month. The rest goes to the state. But Medicaid is what pays for his group home, because Medicaid is much more than medical. It's what pays for, again, residential. It's what pays for job coaches and other day programs, etc. My brother has a job coach, works in the community, and also has a day program when he's not doing those things, and of course has 24/7 support throughout, including the residential piece, all of it paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid is also a backup to private insurance or to Medicare or both. Believe it or not, you can have all three. There's a lot of confusion about that around the state, that you can't have Medicaid and Medicare and private insurance. You have to pick. It's not true. You could have all three, you could have two of them, or you could have only one of them, okay, in any combination. But Medicaid is always the last to pay. So if you have a medical expense, the first place they bill is private insurance, and then they bill Medicare in most cases, and then they bill Medicaid after that. If they don't have Medicare yet, they're just on SSI and Medicaid, let's say, then they would just bill Medicaid. If they have private insurance, they bill private insurance first and Medicaid second. The Medicaid copays for the medical piece of Medicaid is $2 for a generic prescription, $3.90 name brand prescription, $3.90 per visit doctor, $3.90 per day hospital. Now, most doctors in Illinois do not take Medicaid, but hospitals and pharmacies do, so it's very helpful as a backup to private insurance or to Medicare, or again to both. Now, while SSDI and Medicare cannot be accessible until either the individual works and has enough quarters, or the parent takes Social Security retirement disability or passes away, SSI and Medicaid can be applied for as soon as an individual qualifies as disabled and is over the age of 18. Well, the first day of the calendar month after their 18th birthday. All right, so you have to apply for SSI, and once you get the SSI approval, you go over and apply for Medicaid, get a Medicaid approval, and then you're all set. There's different kinds of Medicaid, okay? There's the Affordable Care Act Medicaid, which is the type of Medicaid that looks at parents' income if the parents claim the child is a dependent on their tax returns. There's traditional Medicaid, which does not look at parents' income and assets, just like SSI does not, so long as the individual is an adult and has SSI. And after 19, they don't look at parents' income and assets regardless. They have the same $2,000 asset test, though. There's another type of program for Medicaid if the individual is working in any significant way. All right. Excuse me. So, be aware that sometimes people will be told that they don't qualify for Medicaid because of parents' income, even when the child is an adult, because the Medicaid computers sometimes mess things up and try to only apply for Affordable Care Act Medicaid and not for traditional Medicaid. Don't be deterred. An individual who has SSI and is over 18 should qualify for Medicaid regardless of parents' income. All right. Now, Medicaid, again, is what pays for everything post-22 when the school district is done. A note on private health insurance. General rule is a child cannot stay on a parent's health insurance past the age of 26. However, for a child who is disabled, they could stay on the parent's health insurance forever, past age 26, so long as the child is deemed disabled. All right. If they have SSI or SSDI, that's sufficient. There is a handout number about this law. It's an Illinois student or on a private health insurance plan. They have to allow you to keep your child on if they're disabled past 26. This does not apply to self-insured plans. So if you work for a large corporation or a public entity or a union, they probably, or unionized, they probably are self-insured and don't have to follow this law. Many follow something like it though. Now, there are different divisions that serve people with special needs under the State of Illinois Department of Human Services. Depending on when the brain injury occurred, or again, I know some of the audience may just have a developmental disability, but if the brain injury occurred prior to age 22, or the person is just a developmental disability, then they would fall under the Division of Developmental Disabilities, which is door number 1. If the individual has a mental health diagnosis, that would fall under door number 2, Division of Mental Health. And if they have a physical or primarily medical disability, or they had a traumatic brain injury that occurred after the age of 22, they would fall under the Division of Rehab Services programs. All right, door number 3. Now, if the individual either had a traumatic brain injury that occurred prior to age 22, or they are developmentally disabled in general, they would fall under the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And if you want to get any services from that division, you must A, have Medicaid, and B, be in something called the PUNS. So what is the PUNS? It stands for prioritization of all the programs, group homes, something called home-based support services, in-home supported employment services like job coaches, all of it. You have to have the PUNS, and you have to have Medicaid. Now, how do you get in the PUNS? You go to your Independent Service Coordination Agency, which if you all live in Quincy or from outside of Quincy, you can see which county you're in. It determines which is your access for your ISC agency. All right. And you can see the phone numbers on the right, depending on that agency. Now, these are subject to change. As of June 30th, pending a lawsuit and legislation in Springfield that may undo this, this is subject to be changed to this. Okay. Where area I and L, I mean, they're just changing around the whole state's the service provision. So this is still pending again, an appeal, not an appeal process, that was already done, a court case going on right now, as well as a piece of legislation that might undo this. But if either of those fail, both those fail, then this system, the current map will be changed as of June 30th to this map. Okay, so that I hate to be as unclear as that is, but that's the current situation right now.
Benji,
go ahead.
Is there a way to blow up your screen? Because we're seeing a split screen.
You're seeing a split screen. All right.
Yeah.
Let me try something here. Screen. Hold on. Oop, oop. Huh. Oh, hold on. Okay, share. Is that better? Or is it the same thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Okay, so you see this one, and this is the one that's the current map. So if you are calling to get into the PUNS right now because you have a child who's a developmental disability or had a traumatic brain injury that occurred prior to age 22, then this is your map to look at for who you should call to get in the PUNS. All right. But after June 30th, it might change to this new map that we'll show you in a second. But I want to give everyone a minute here then, now that it's all blown up, to write down the phone number for your respective agency that you need to contact.
All right, so ours is West Central Service Coordination.
Okay, so everyone there is in that area, correct? No one who's attending today is from a different area.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No.
All right, so everyone's from that area. So you see the number there, 217-285-5227. Okay. And that's again the current ISC. And let's see, I forget if your area was changed. Hold on. Let's go to the next slide if it'll let me. Yes, it was. So your new area would be Central Illinois Service Access would be your new one, right? Yeah, Central Illinois Service Access would be your new one. We have a new, or maybe delayed, but eventually. All right. Okay. Now they fill out the PUNS. If you're going to get into the PUNS, they'll fill that form out for you. But we're not deeming you to be a crisis in planning, which means you'll need services in the future. You should always say, at the very least, you're seeking services, and if you're in crisis, tell them you're in crisis. If your child is aging out of special education, or the individual that you're serving for the professionals in the room is aging out of special ed and needs services as soon as they get out, they're going to be sitting at home otherwise, that is deemed to be a crisis under most people's definition, and they should apply through the PUNS for crisis funding. All right. Now you want to at least be seeking services if you tell your ISC that you're planning then you're basically telling them to just not, you might as well not even be in the system. Don't do that. Tell them you're seeking services. Okay. Now, individuals who have developmental disabilities or a traumatic brain injury before, as a child, and they can get, it doesn't look at assets and income of the parents. The parents can be multimillionaires and still get this program. The only people getting it right now have to be in crisis. So generally it's someone who has severe behavioral issues or other reasons why they are deemed to be a crisis. It's worth $1,542 a month private insurance at that point. All right. Again, to be a crisis, the children's waiver in Illinois is an individual with severe behavioral issues. Okay, they're hitting people. They might, they are a danger to themselves and other people. Those people get the children's waiver these days. Other people have to basically wait. Now, under the PUNS and the Division of Almost Disabilities, as an adult, there's other programs available. So there's something called home-based support services. That is, they may be living at home or in their own apartment or something like that, to be used after age 22 or after the age out of special ed. As you see, it's less before that, to be used to pay for support for them to live either in an apartment by themselves or with mom and dad. If they're living with mom and dad, it can be paid to a parent income tax free for so long as they're living there. So it's basically $28,000 to help subsidize their living. Okay. If they live in a group home, something called in-home, they could choose something called in-home or family SILA, which is still a type of group home, which is basically living at home, and they get a day program plus 15 hours a week. Or they could choose out-of-home SILA, like my brother has, which is a full group home. The average rate in Illinois is $55,000 per person per year. My brother's rate is over $90,000 per year because of his behavioral issues. Right? The ICFDD is a campus. Okay. Many of you may be familiar with Beverly Farms, which is down by St. Louis area and the Illinois border. They are an operating farm that is technically what they call an intermediate care facility for people with developmental disabilities. Their average rates are much higher than group homes because they're required to have certain medical services or medical professionals on staff. Misericordia up in the city of Chicago, the Catholic Archdiocese, is another large group, a large campus. And the SODCs are the state-operated developmental centers, the state institutions. They have a much higher rate on average. Some of the rates I've seen is $300,000 to $400,000 per person per year. So that's the way that the rates work in Illinois. Our rates at the community level, that $55,000 average, is really, really low. Nationally, across the country, it's much closer to $100,000 per person per year on average. And someone like my brother would be funded even higher than that, significantly higher than that. The best states are funded about $200,000 per person per year for a group home. So our rates are very low. The only place that we're actually very generous is in the state institutions, where we do fund them very, very heavily. All right. So the state of Illinois Division of Developmental Disabilities has a definition of developmental disabilities. Okay. And they still use the MR definition as of the last time I checked, I think it was last year, and they still used it, which is ridiculous, but they do. Now, what they want to see is either an IQ test given before age 18, but after age 17 that shows an IQ score of 70 or below. That's the first test. That's the easiest way to get into the Division of Developmental Disabilities. The other way is to show that they have a severe chronic disability that meets all of these definitions. Okay, so even if you can't have an IQ score that was before age 18, that was 70 or below, if they either have CP or epilepsy or any condition other than mental illness, okay, this is where someone with a traumatic brain injury that occurred prior to, as we'll see, item number 2, age 22, can qualify under this Division of Developmental Disabilities. Okay, so if they have a non-mental illness disability that's similar to a developmental disability in terms of its effects, how it affects them, manifests before age 22, likely to continue indefinitely, it results in substantial functional limitations in 3 or more of the major life activities. So if you look at that item number 4 there, self-care, language, learning, mobility, self-direction, and capacity for independent living. All right, it's not like they're gonna basically, it's subjective. All right, so they're gonna look at, well, do they have some limitations there? No, they're looking at, they have substantial functional limitations. It doesn't have to be debilitating limitations in those areas, but certainly substantial functional limitations in at least 3 of those areas. Okay, so if we get that, we can get through that process, they can get deemed developmentally disabled, and we can get services for them. All right. So I'll pause there because I think that may affect some people that may not have an IQ score of 70 or below before age 18, but may be able to show this. So someone who has a primarily physical disability, of course, could qualify as developmentally disabled and get some of these programs, which could be very useful because if you have an individual that has a very substantial physical, they're affected physically but not cognitively, and so cannot work. The ability to have a social security check, maybe on a parent's work record once they retire, that could be $1,500 a month, let's say, and have home-based support services worth $28,000 a year, could be a huge source of support for them. All right. Again, you can get Social Security disability without being deemed developmentally disabled. They're two separate programs, but of course you could have both. Now, if an individual is not going to be able to be deemed developmentally disabled, as I imagine maybe the individuals that have a disability, who have a traumatic brain injury themselves, or have some sort of brain injury themselves, may be in this category. You may be able to get some services from the Division of Rehab Services, DRS. Now they have their own system of waiver services, which they call them waiver. That it's basically a Medicaid programs that pay for certain things. Personal assistant, homemaker services. You can see the whole list here, all the way to you see for brain injury. They have help with if you have someone has behavioral issues, rehabilitation, pre-vocational supported employment programs for someone who has a brain injury. It's the TBI waiver. So there are certain programs specifically for people with brain injuries that are not developmentally disabled because their brain injury occurred after, let's say, age 22, right? Or maybe they don't have substantial functional limitations in those major life activities. By the way, let me just go back to that one more time. They do a DON score, determination of need, to see what level of services you're eligible for, which is, again, different from the PUNS. Okay? It's its own system. If you want to get into the system and get qualified, you call that number listed on the screen there, 1-800-843-6154. All right. Now, there's different, different things people over the years have done when they talk about planning for an individual with disabilities. Well, the most obvious thing is they would leave money directly to them to help them take care of themselves. That, of course, is going to be a problem for government benefits. Can't have more than $2,000 in their name. And if you don't have a will, the law rates one for you in Illinois, half goes to spouse and half goes to the kids. And if you're not married or your spouse is not alive, all of it goes to the kids. All right. Now, we can't just disinherit who is going to be on government benefits or is currently on. We could, but that would be gambling because we'd be leaving it under a moral obligation to other people to use it for the fund for them. Therefore, the basics come back to us when you run out of money. So the answer is special needs trust. About a few slides, but maybe trust. And it gets to talk about one or the other kind, and they try to separate them, show you what they have in common, and then show you what they are different. So third-party trust for gifts and inheritances, self-settled trust, sometimes called OBRA, first-party special needs trusts, D4A trust, or payback trust. Both these trusts, what they have in common is the reserve funds over and above government benefits. There could be millions of dollars inside of either type of special needs trust, and it would not affect government benefits at all as long as the trust is drafted correctly. So let's talk now about money that belongs to the individual. This trust has been around for a long time now. Never, ever, ever can the individual's own money go in here. Also, as we'll talk about child support, cannot go in here either. Excuse me. Anyone other than the individual with disabilities, after that individual, when they pass on, then the individual doesn't have children, siblings, nieces and nephews of the individual with disabilities. So the parents get this. So it's not going to be inside the parents' trust. We want the special needs trust, and there's several reasons for that. We want it to exist now, and if a named the special needs trust in their documents, because mom and dad will still be alive when grandma and grandpa die, and therefore there's going to be no trust established for them to leave money to. We also want to be grandfathered. Historically, we cannot be grandfathered. Also, when you apply for benefits or on redeterminations, which they do regularly, they want to make sure you're still qualified. They'll ask for copies of trust that the beneficiary of. I don't want to give them an entire estate planning. The more things you give to Social Security and Medicaid, the more questions they ask and the more issues we run into and the longer things take. I'd rather give them just one document, the special needs trust. So there's also another reason. This can be crucial. We call it the nursing home empowerment exception. Basically, the general rule is if, God forbid, anyone, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, anyone in the family needs skilled nursing care, they, God forbid, got Alzheimer's or dementia, and they needed to go to a nursing home, they needed 24/7 skilled nursing care, and the cost of that who's going to be $7,000 or $8,000 a month. Okay, that's not uncommon when in those situations. So if that was to be the case, you can't just give your money away and say, okay, I have my home and I have my, retirement account or my whatever I have left. I can't just give that away to, the other kids and have the state pay for me. There's a 5-year look back period to prevent people from doing that very thing of giving their assets away and having the state pay for them. But there is a federal exception to that rule. The individual, mom, dad, grandma, or grandpa, can move their assets into the special needs trust if it's drafted correctly and it's a freestanding third-party special needs trust, and qualify themselves the next day for skilled nursing care. No 5-year look-back period. Okay. Now there has to be very specific language in the trust. We do it as a sub-trust inside of our third-party special needs trust. It's a really complicated stuff, but if you have the magic words in there, you can have it qualify as a place where you can put the money in and no 5-year look back the next day. You can qualify yourself, or grandma or grandpa or whoever can qualify themselves for skilled nursing care. This will help a lot of parents who worry about the fact that what if I save all this money and then I get, I have one of these diseases, degenerative diseases, and now all that money is going to be spent on my care and there's nothing left for their child. This gives them peace of mind. They can always move the assets into the trust and then the money's protected. Also, if parents have revocable living trusts, there's issues with the fact that on their disability, the trust could be used to support their dependents. So we need language that then refers to a freestanding special needs trust. All those are reasons to have a freestanding third-party special needs trust. We say, all right, my head's kind of spinning here. Let's slow down in here. What is this trust concept we're talking about here? People understand what a will is, right? I die, what happens to my money? But this trust concept we keep talking about, it's another way of holding title ownership to assets. It's like we're setting up a business, if you will, right? It can own any asset a person can own. It can own real estate, it could own, it can own property, land. It can own stocks and bonds and mutual funds, investments. It could own a checking account and a money market account, a savings account. Anything a person can own, a trust can own. All right. The paperwork is the instruction manual, the rules of the road. If there's an account, if there's an investment, if there's land in the name of this trust, who's in charge of it? What happens what happens if mom and dad are in charge of the trust? Who is in charge afterwards? Where does the income from the trust go? How does that all work? All of that is written into the. All right. Now, how do we do that? We have an instruction letter. Individual who's on benefits or going to be on benefits. Here's the language to use so you don't have it all go to the government. But we like to go a step further and give families a form amendment to their will or a form amendment to the living trust. It literally says across the top, extended family form codicil, which is a fancy word for nothing, goes directly to the individual with disability. Special needs planning is to with the attorney of grandma or grandpa or setting up a special needs trust, referencing it in the parents' documents, getting the word up to the extended family, but we cannot forget to change beneficiaries. We see this almost every month. And someone forgets to change a life insurance beneficiary designation or on their IRA, and now something, while they did maybe their will and it said go to the special needs trust, they never changed the beneficiary on their life insurance or an IRA, and therefore it's going directly to the individual with disabilities. All right, so we have to remember to change that. Grandma and grandpa, that's bigger than that, then maybe have them write the check to the special needs trust. The only one who's making the gifts has a very, very large, more than $10 million. In those very unique circumstances, you do need to actually, and as you saw in the intro, I have my LLM in tax law from Northwestern, so of planning, you have to be careful about gifts to the trust. But again, majority of people, 99.9% of people, $10. All right. So far we talked about a third-party trust, but what if someone messed up and left money directly to they messed, but we don't want to waste it. So if it's something we can't spend, on one account per beneficiary. The beneficiary is the owner and control of the account by default, unless the parents are guardians or the beneficiary designates someone else to be in charge of the account, like a parent or a sibling. The balance cannot be more than $10,000 in order for them to continue to qualify for SSI. And their max they can have in Illinois is $400,000. Actually, I want to say that they increased after the first of this year to $450,000. But regardless, it's $15,000 a year, so it takes a very long time to get there. There is a payback though on this money when the child passes away. So this is not a place I want mom and dad putting their money or grandma and grandpa gifting money. It's a great place to save the individual's money that's already in their name. It does grow income tax free inside of the account. The beneficiary of that is the state because there's a payback when they die to the state for what Medicaid's paid during their lifetime. All right. So what is a great use for able security or work earnings? So we have the scenarios we've come across now several times where an individual is on a parent's work record getting $2,000 a month because the parent had a very, very substantial work history. And they're getting home-based worth $28,000 a year, and they're just not spending their Social Security fast enough. They can save excess Social Security into the ABLE account. It's also a way to give an individual control over spending money. So let's say we have an individual who has only physical disabilities, but they really need to protect their benefits and protect Medicaid. So we can't give them money directly. This is a way to give them access to up to $15,000 a year of spending money without having any issues with government benefits. So the Special Needs Trust, for example, can even distribute money to the ABLE account to give the beneficiary full control over some money. There's a game you can play to avoid that 1/3 reduction for housing expenses, but that's kind of a complicated matter. If you really want to get into that, we could talk about that later. Again, if grandma leaves $5,000 to every grandchild, ABLE account may be a good use to put that money into. If you have a 529 college savings plan set up for an individual who no longer is going to be going to college, it's a great place to transfer that money because while it's in a 529 plan, if they are deemed disabled, there is no penalty for using it for non-educational expenses, but you still have to pay the income tax liability on it. But if you convert it to an ABLE account up to $15,000 a year, you can do this since the new law was passed in 2018. You can actually avoid even paying the taxes on it and use it for anything that would qualify as an ABLE account expenditure, which is pretty much anything for the benefit of the individual with disabilities. Also, the individual with disabilities who is working can actually contribute all of their work earnings. Every dollar of their work earnings, up to $11,770, essentially every dollar of their work earnings can be contributed to an ABLE account. So that's great too, to keep them under that $2,000 asset test. Now, again, actually, I want to emphasize contributing to an ABLE account does not reduce their income. It just reduces their assets. Earned income is still earned income regardless of whether or not it gets contributed to an ABLE account. The ABLE account helps us shelter from that $2,000 asset test. It does not avoid the 1220 income test, the $1,220 income test. A side note on that 1220 income test, okay? The 1220 income test that we mentioned with SSI, that's a lifelong test. If an individual goes over that amount in a single month of gross work earnings of $1,220 in a month, there's a lot of consequences depending on what benefits they're on and what benefit in their situations. If the individual is disabled before age 22, so we want to get them that DAC status to get into a parent's record and get a lot more money from Social Security based on the parent's work history. If they ever earn for a single month more than $1,220 a month, it is likely that they have blown their chance of ever going onto a parent's work record. So don't do that unless it makes sense and you're just taking that to understand you're taking it off the table. They can never go on the parent's record. So just to be aware of that, it's very important because people do this and then they don't realize that they did it. They can't earn gross over 1220 until the parent's on Social Security retirement. Once the parent is on Social Security retirement and the child has gone on to SSDI on the parent's record, if they earn over 1220, then it has less of an impact. But if they earn it before the parent goes to Social Security retirement and they have DAC status, they can lose that DAC status immediately. So just a note about that. Now, Illinois passed a statute last year to try to make ABLE accounts more attractive. However, it's not as great as they try to make it sound. First of all, they said they got rid of the payback, but it's not true. They only got rid of the payback with regard to non-medical waiver programs. Basically, any services that anyone that we're talking about would get, they would still have to pay back the state for. Also, if they got medical post-age 55 for Medicaid, medical services from Medicaid post-age 55, they would have to pay back the state. They also gave us a tax deduction for parents contributing to it. But again, there's a payback to the state when the child dies. It doesn't really make sense to do that. So, all right. Now, child support. Some people, the state of Illinois tried to allow the child support to be paid to an ABLE account to to allow families that where the parents were divorced to pay it to there. It doesn't work. The federal government says you can't do that, so don't do that. Where you have to put child support, which we'll talk about, is a first-party special needs trust. This is that other kind of trust we talked about that has a sad face next to it, also known as a first-party or payback trust, been around since the mid-90s. And again, a lot of different names for it, but it has a payback trust is one of them because, like an ABLE account, as you can see, it comes in from inheritance, if not correctly left to a third-party trust. So this is grandma, grandpa messed up. Some people call this the oops trust. Maybe a litigation settlement, medical malpractice settlement, or personal injury settlement that resulted. They now have this big sale for what the state's paid for Medicaid. Have to, not because we want, we'd like to use for everything if we can. All right. Other issues with the first-party trust: can use it if you're over 65, grandparents, courts, guardians, or the individual themselves. So if the individual case and the parent they want court approval, in some counties require ongoing, and I'm not sure about your counties out there, but some counties require ongoing jurisdiction over the trust and annual accountings and reports about how the money was spent, and that they can question expenditures. Also, like we said, there's a payback to day one. By the way, ABLE accounts payback slightly different. It's from the day the account was established, unlike the first-party special needs trust, which looks at all Medicaid paid for during the lifetime of the individual. Now, again, the child paying adult child support, which is permitted when the individual is disabled, it has to go to a first-party special needs trust, not a third-party trust. If the parent that we're talking about, the situation of how a child support has to be ordered to, if there's no alternative, do we use the first-party trust? But I want to take a moment to talk about the nursing home exception. All right. We talked about this earlier about the fact that you can have the money go into a third-party special needs trust with certain provisions in it and no 5-year look-back period to qualify mom or dad or grandma or grandpa for skilled nursing care. One of the problems is that mom or dad or grandma or grandpa may not have capacity to transfer the assets into the special needs trust to qualify themselves for the nursing care. So we put language in mom and dad's estate plan, and hopefully grandma and grandpa's estate plan, it can be done as well, to say that if this ever makes sense, my successor trustees and agents can move my assets into the special needs trust to qualify me for skilled nursing care. If that language is not in there and the person does not have capacity, we cannot take advantage of this exception. All right. So people say, how do I spend the money first? You spend work earnings and Social Security money first, because spend it or lose it. If you save excess Social Security or work earnings in an ABLE account, you spend that next, or if there's a first-party for things after we spend everything else. So some of you in the room may have special needs trusts in place. I want to go through a few mistakes we see commonly in special needs trusts, so you have a sense of things to the right provisions in it. No grandfathering support languages that cites all the laws, rules, Medicaid regulations, etc., that allow us to do a special needs trust. And so if you don't have that language in there and they change the laws or rules on us, then we will not be grandfathered in many cases. The prohibition of putting first-party money into a third-party trust, because if we put $1 of the child's money, whether it's their Social Security or work earnings or money that grandma gave them directly, into a third-party special needs trust will taint the whole trust. The whole thing becomes a resource. So we want to prohibit that from ever happening. We also want language that says if there is an ABLE account or a first-party payback trust, use that money first before you touch the third-party trust, because that money gets paid back to the state when the child passes. You might as well use it for their benefit during their lifetime. We also need to make sure that the trust is 100% discretionary. It can be used for anything in the world that's for the benefit of the individual's disabilities. We cannot allow money to be paid directly to the beneficiary, or it'll reduce or eliminate their benefits. However, we can allow money to be paid to an ABLE account so that they can have some amounts of money that they can have access to if this is an individual who can manage smaller amounts of money or even significant amounts of money, but because of government benefit rules, they can't have money in their name. All right. Now, one of the issues we do see a lot and mistakes from special interests we've seen over the years is overly restrictive language. It'll say you can't use this trust to pay for food, shelter, or sometimes even clothing. And that is because of rules under SSI, Supplemental Security Income, called the POMS, the Program Operations Manual System, that is the Social Security rules that say, how it affects SSI. Now, I don't want language that says you can't use their food or shelter. Number one, the worst case scenario is we reduce their SSI from 771 to 514. Not the end of the world in most cases. Number two, for most of their life, they'll be an SSDI potentially on a parent's work record or on their own record, And we don't care about that rule because it doesn't apply to SSDI. It only applies to SSI, that 1/3 reduction for using a trust for housing expenses or food expenses. So I don't want overly restrictive language in there. We want the trustee to be able to change the trust if the Social Security comes out with a new policy, even if it's not a change in the law or rule or regulation, which most trusts allow changes for. It's not just a change in a rule or regulation, but in a policy of how they're applying rules. I want the trust to be able to be changed as necessary. We also talk about next generation trustees. You can see there my daughter, who's on the left there. My nephews over on the right with a picture with my brother there bowling. Those are his 4 nieces and nephews right now. And we're saying, they may be future trustees, because what if, as my sister and I get older, one of them would be a good person to act if we're like, we're getting up there in years, and they could take over at this point if my brother is still living. So we want the ability for those to be brought up. So we put language to say that the successor trustees can name additional people after them, including the next generation. All right. We've actually seen it happen where a niece or nephew is acting as trustee for their aunt or uncle. So that is very important language in many cases to have in there. What else? Contribution language. If we're talking about an individual that is going to be getting substantial services, maybe residential, they need 24/7 support, and there's this great program and we need to get them into that program, and their state's not paying them enough for high quality care, they do fundraising activities. So how do we help support that organization? The trust can make contributions that the trustee deems to be in the best interest of the beneficiary, maybe to keep an organization going or to help that organization. Also, the real world is, if the individual's getting a lot of services from a service provider and they're a nonprofit, and you make substantial contributions every year, and it doesn't take that much to be substantial in many cases, they're going to answer your calls when the family calls and has a question or wants something dealt with. So that's one of the reasons we say it's very important to allow for charitable contributions to organizations providing services. Most trusts don't even have this provision in there because people don't think about it, but it's very important that it be in there. My brother's group home is a small group home setting. It is only 4 individuals in the group home. And while that is very common down in Quincy area to have a very small group home, because the rate they pay in Quincy or in the surrounding area is the same as they pay up in the Chicago metro area, even though the cost of living is much higher. So it goes a lot further down by you guys as it does go by where my brother lives. So therefore, we have to subsidize his rate essentially, and we do that by making non-binding contributions to the organization providing him services. It's a very common arrangement. So again, all kinds of reasons we want to be able to make contributions. Also, gift language. They're going to a niece or nephew's birthday party. We want a gift coming from their aunt or uncle. We could have that language in there to allow for that. Okay. Termination provision. What if this individual, we did all this planning, it turns out they're doing fantastic. They don't even need it. They can control their own assets. They don't need benefits. We can have a provision to allow for the trustee at their discretion to terminate the trust as necessary and give them their money outright. What if a to-be-born grandchild or some other individual, remote contingent beneficiary, has special needs themselves? We want to build in language just in case that nothing would go to them and mess up their benefits. Some states, if grandma lives in Florida, may require that different rules about this nursing home exception of the kind of special interest that they can contribute to. So we want language in there to cover those situations. If someone has a public pension, whether they're a public school teacher and have TRS, they're a university professor and have state university retirement system pension, or if they're a member of the military and have a military pension, they all have special rules that allow special needs trust to be the recipient of monthly pension annuities for the rest of the individual disability's life, but you have to follow very special rules and all those, and they're different for every pension program. So you need to have the trust have very specific provisions in it related to that pension, even citing the pension code that we're talking about. Change of state, Arizona, you want to change states and they're moving with you to that new state. Medicaid is state specific. They can come up with their own Medicaid regulations in the state you move to. So we need the ability to change the trust as necessary to qualify under new state laws or Medicaid regulations in the state that the individual is now living in and getting Medicaid services from. Also, the parents' wills and their revocable living trust, if they have living trust, and their powers of attorney and other estate planning instruments, They all have to have special language in there related to the special needs planning aspects. It's not just about the special needs trust. All right, for an adult disabled person, an individual who needs a guardian, my wife and I talking about my daughter, and my wife's also expecting our second child in July, a boy. We're talking about, well, who do we trust to do that, and who do you think will do, would be the best? But it's not as serious a conversation as it is when we have an individual who's going to need a guardian, which legally delegates your parental responsibility for parents who are guardians. That allows you to delegate your guardian responsibility temporarily for a few weeks, a week, 5 days. It's not just like a letter. How many of you have, for the parents, the child?
Most of us are over.
To be a competent adult in the eyes of the law. So the first thing is, well, do we need to do guardianship? Well, not automatically. In most cases, it may not make any sense, all right? Well, there is something called the Healthcare Surrogate Act in Illinois that says that if an individual does not have capacity to make medical decisions for themselves, then a parent can make medical decisions for them if they're not married and don't have any adult children. But if the individual wants mom or dad or someone else to help them with decisions, including financial and medical decisions, they can sign powers of attorney to themselves or to other, basically to like mom and dad. The individual with disabilities can sign power of attorney to mom and dad. Okay, there's also the option of doing a limited or partial guardianship, limited to certain areas, and signing a power of attorney for the areas that the limited guardianship does not cover, or doing a plenary or full guardianship, which basically means they're 17 again, are great for an individual who is, needs some help to help them. But it's not a protection for themselves and other people. If someone was to maybe take advantage of them because they have diminished capacity, they might need a guardianship. Okay, and again, limited guardianship limited to certain areas versus a plenary or full guardianship where they're 17 again. All right. You're balancing independence. You're trying to make someone as independent as possible, but you want to protect them from themselves and other people. It is a lawsuit. You're taking away rights from someone who's presumed to be a competent adult in the eyes of the law. You have to have an Illinois licensed MD, or the law was changed literally this week that now you can also have an Illinois licensed psychologist that can sign off on a report that they need a guardian. You have to have service of process, so getting sued. That's how they work it, same system. So what we do is we have you do a field trip to the sheriff's office, and then you get in touch with the papers to make it a little bit less daunting. Anyone can be appointed if they're a U.S. resident, even if they don't live in the same state. You have to give notice to everyone who's of equal standing to the people applying for guardianship. So that means adult siblings. If parents apply, adult siblings have to be. It doesn't matter. They can still vote because after all, you can be dead and vote in Illinois. Won't affect this, but plenary guardianship does, is because they want. I'll keep. It's kind of a negotiation where you say, all right. Also, liability concerns. If the individual is might hurt someone or damage property, and we don't want the guardians to become liable, then sometimes we do a limited guardianship to limit that liability. And if the individual is going to be driving, all right, we can't do a plenary guardianship, as we're about to talk about. If you do a plenary guardianship, the driver's license is void. Adult guardianship. This is interesting. Cook County, the most populous county in the state, because of political, inside, politics. Basically, Mike Madigan decided that Cook County should be exempt because Sister Rosemary of the Catholic Archdiocese in Chicago asked him that they exempt Cook County. And basically asked him that they exempt families of children of Misericordia. And so he exempted all of Cook County because you can't exempt only families that have children of Misericordia. Pretty ridiculous, but that's literally what happened. Regardless, they did exempt Cook County for no legitimate reason, but that's the case. Everyone else, including all the collar counties, and of course, every other county in the state, must have the parents go through training. If you're not already guardians, if you're already guardians, you're grandfathered in. But if you have a new guardianship take place this year, you're going to have to go through training. It's an online course. If you change counties, they move to a different county, the individual with disabilities, it's up to the judge if we have to transfer it. If they move out of states, we do have to transfer the guardianship. If you want more information about guardianship, you can check the box. Sorry, it's number 5 there about guardianship versus the alternatives, powers of attorney. So that's more information about that, an article talking about it. Now, the bus stops coming the day before 22. So what's out there? Basically, it used to be called developmental training, which is keep them safe, busy, and out of trouble. There are different versions of all these programs. Obviously, the goal is supported employment or competitive employment in the long run. Illinois does not fund supported employment the way they should. Some states have over 80% employment rates for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Illinois has like and so many other things. State of Illinois system for being it is almost always a disaster to have where the parents did not plan for this, and now the sibling is moving in with their brother or sister, or the sibling with special needs is moving in with their brother or sister. We've seen where siblings have gotten by their brother or sister with significant disabilities moving in with them and becoming part of the household there and having all the dynamics that entails. So definitely not a recommended plan. Of course, what are the other options? State institutions, Beverly Farms, and group home, and 20 or 30 hours a week versus staffs are 24/7. And then there is the other model of saying an individual that is relatively independent but needs some support, of using their Social Security, especially if they can be covered, plus their own work earnings, maybe the supports and services that they need. All right. Now, this is talking about a lawsuit that allows a lot more people active. There's 20 times, close to 700 or 800 are selected each year. Time for questions. So I'm going to move through now to talking about letters of intent. Can help with history, diagnoses, hospitalizations, medications they've been on, never wanted to be on, each certain medications they may be on. If they're having a difficult time, what will make it worse? What might help? If they're employment, what types of jobs have been. Thoughts. Someone's past individual who is stressed with the down score, depending on what service provision you're getting. Where are they safe on safety deposit box that no one else is named, and a locked safe that no one else knows the code to or has a key to. Put them in a situation where at least anyone that needs to can get access to it. As guardians, brother was to pass on if we, assuming my sister worked. And then how to fix 24 or 48 hours with the bullet points of the medical stuff. We can send it to you if you would.
All right. There seemed to talk about age requirements for both able accounts and acquiring of said disability. What happens to those who don't meet those requirements? Is there any other options for them?
So for able accounts, there's pending legislation in Washington that has some legs that may expand the age requirement to 45 or 46. So it'll definitely increase to like the mid 40s. So if somebody has if their disability occurred after age 26 but before age 45 or 46, then they'll be able to still qualify for the able account. For SSI, the 22 rule about acquiring a disability before age 22, that only is so that they can get an parent's work record. They can still be eligible for SSI or SSDI in their own work record, even if they became disabled later. It's just that they cannot get on a parent's work record if their disability occurred after age 22.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
If a parent has to go into a nursing home, but their pension or whatever has to go to the surviving spouse,
yes.
How do they kind of need that money to live on? So how do you get that money into the special needs trust to protect it from the nursing home?
So pensions are difficult because it's not an asset that you can just transfer. It's a promised benefit that's going to be paid out. So basically what it normally does is that it goes to it's a problem. It basically goes to the nursing home. And I'm not an elder law attorney. This is actually kind of an area that I know as it relates to special needs planning, like we've talked about, but this is really kind of merging more into elder law. But basically, let's say there's a husband and wife, and the wife had a teacher's pension, and the teacher's pension is being paid out to them, and then they have a degenerative disease, and they go into a nursing home. That pension is going to go to pay for the nursing home. And it basically has to go to pay the nursing home. The individual who's still at home, let's say in this case the husband, is allowed to keep $125,000 of assets plus the house and a car, and that's it. As for what income they can keep from a pension, I'm not positive on that. You cannot, though, just redirect that pension to the special needs trust if it's a monthly pension to be paid during their lifetime. Now, when the individual dies, then that pension, especially a state pension, can be paid directly to the special needs trust. But during their lifetime, I'm almost positive that it has to go to the nursing home to offset the cost of care.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question related to transition.
Okay. Go ahead.
You have somebody who has, let's say, the parent is in their 60s, they think they're going to live forever, and the person with special needs is living at home, and it sounds like from what you say, they do get money from SSI or SSDI to live at home with their parent versus living residential. I'm trying to plot out from a financial point of view what's in best interest for the family as far as planning for future transitions. Should, and where I talk about, I have a girlfriend whose daughter was DD from fetal alcohol syndrome, okay? And she talked to my mom, who was a special ed teacher in Chicago, and my mother had encouraged her to plan for her transition.
Right.
And so she did sign up her daughter for a group home.
Okay.
And long wait to get into the group home, and we never talked finances. We were mostly just talking about the whole idea of planning for the family future.
Right.
Well, story short, the mom retired at 65. She's one of my good friends, and she dropped dead 6 months later. So the good news was the girl had already been transitioning into a group home. She didn't have, the sibling was young, only like about 24, 25, so wouldn't have been able to really take over the parent because it was a single parent household.
Yeah.
So from a financial point of view, I guess I've never asked the money version of it. Is it best to keep your children at home, or is it best to transition them to future living when maybe you're not around?
Right. So it's definitely, and then from the money perspective, I mean, I would kind of set that aside and say that it is very important that the transition to living in a sustainable, living situation in the community while the parent is not only alive but fully capable of being a big part of the process is crucial. Having the process occur in crisis situation is oftentimes a disaster. So I give the example of, we had a situation where we could not convince we got the individual to do some do the estate planning, and they made sure their documents were in order, their beneficiary designations were correct to the special needs trust, and their child with Down syndrome was working in a job with a job coach, and so they had something to do during the day, but they still lived at home with dad, who was now 85. Mom had already died. Dad died on his way to pick her up. We got a phone call because our business card was in this guy's wallet, and it said call an emergency from the police. And basically, we had to figure out, where is his daughter, who's now 58 years old, going to be, staying that night. Okay, that is not what we want. Okay, because this individual's only sibling lived in Australia. Okay, so we do not want that situation. We want a full life in the community that is sustainable after mom and dad are gone. And we want mom and dad to be able to be a full part of that process of helping them transition. And the older you do it, the harder it is. There are organizations that will basically refuse to allow to accept an individual who is over the age of 40 or over the age of 50 to first start to transition that late. Okay, it is much, much easier to have someone transition in their 20s or early 30s. It's also, again, at the age where the parents are young enough to be able to be part of the process, where if the first situation that we thought was a good option doesn't work out, they can regroup. They can go backwards and regroup and find a better situation. Whereas if mom and dad are 80, we don't have much time to do that. Okay, so I very, very much encourage parents to start figuring this out, trying to build that full life in the community for them while they still are not only alive, but young enough to be a very vibrant, active part of that process, and make sure it's the best situation, not just whatever we can come up with in crisis.
Thank you. My mother taught special ed in the Chicago public schools for 30 years, And a good example of some of the children that she has, I just visited them in Phoenix the other day. And it was a good example of how they had aunties and moms, and that those people died. And, you know, it's been a life story with my family, is that my mother always had her other kids that she was working to try and be an advocate. And I think it's really hard to plan that you're not going to be there.
Right.
It's hard to do. From a sibling point of view, you talked a little bit about in the beginning. One area with people with brain injuries is that people usually don't talk much about siblings. And in our group, we've been around for about 35 years, and we've had very little sibling interest or sibling engagement in our organization. Do you have any advice? I'm the president of the organization, about what you would say as a sibling of somebody with special needs that we should probably look forward to introducing, and any ideas for our organization to look in the future to meet siblings' needs of persons with brain injuries specifically.
Well, I mean, I think we need to, it starts with, you talk to the parents who are usually the most engaged in this topic, and to say, hey, it's like we were just talking about, the people that you do the planning for, parents don't want to think about them being gone. And my father calls it the parents' prayer. Let me let them have a long, healthy, enjoyable life. Let me live 1 moment longer, because no one will do for their child what they are doing. And it may be true that no one will do. And of course, you're talking about paid, worker, someone who's paid service, direct service staff versus a family member. It's very different. But if what we also have to think about is, it's not really for mom and dad that we're doing this planning. Okay, it's an unselfish thing to do this planning. Okay, because it's horrible. It's heart-wrenching to think about. It's heart-wrenching to actually carry out. I mean, when my father talks about my brother moving into a group home when he was 22 and how difficult that was for him, for my mother, just that transition, and it feels like you're, giving your child away, and feelings about that and all kinds of stuff. It's a really, really tough thing to do, and it's this kind of tough love kind of thing. But it's not for mom and dad you're doing this. It's actually horrible for mom and dad. It feels terrible. In fact, the individual with disabilities, maybe, at least in the short run, it's their best interest to stay at home with mom and dad, because that's the best environment possible. But, big but, in the long run, for the individual with disabilities, if they are going to have a crisis when mom and dad die, that's a reason why we don't want to wait that long, because that's going to be a disaster. So yeah, it was great while mom and dad were alive, but now we have a crisis. And number two, the people who probably get hurt the most when the parents say, I'm never going to die, is the siblings, because now it falls into the siblings' lap. And when I tell parents who are kind of putting blinders on, is that we've seen siblings get divorced. We've seen siblings' lives basically completely upended and completely uprooted and in many ways destroyed, because the parents didn't do any planning, and the siblings scrambled to come up with a solution of where their brother or sister was living, and they felt an obligation to figure this out. And it meant that their marriage was upended. It might mean that they couldn't provide the parental support that they wanted to provide to their own children and whatnot. And most parents don't want that. Most parents say, no, I want my other kids to have their own lives and have their own families and not have this upend their life. I fully expect them to be there as advocates, and when different varying capacities for their brother or sister who has this brain injury, but I certainly don't want them to be 24/7 parents for them, and a situation where it could become a real detriment to their future life. So, that's what I try to tell parents is that it's the siblings who really, in many ways, benefit the most from future planning and are hurt the most when it's not done.
Thank you.
Benji, could you talk briefly about the special needs trust, owning real estate, and how common that is, and any unique challenges that poses?
So, I mean, it's very common. Oftentimes, I mean, again, it depends on the individual. If this is an individual that does not need 24/7 support, oftentimes they can have service, basically like division rehab services through the TBI waiver. They can get a certain number of hours a week of services and brought into the house that the special needs trust can own, and it's an exempt asset. And when the child passes, unlike an exempt asset owned by the child, it's owned by the special needs trust, the third party trust. It stays in the family when the child passes and doesn't disappear. If anyone in the audience has agricultural land, farm property, one of the issues with that is that it produces ordinary income. Okay, and ordinary income is not taxed. It's taxed at a very high rates inside of a trust. So that's one thing that we talk about with families is if we have a lot of farmland that we may want to really think about it in terms of if we can allocate other assets, if there are other assets of significance to the special needs trust and give the other kids the farm property to just avoid that tax hit. But if we can't, there's ways to try and minimize it to the extent we can. But that's one of the issues we run into is if it's income producing property like farmland, is we have to be careful about how taxes work with that. But in general, it's very common. The trust pays all of the expenses for the land or for the house or the real estate, and the individual can live there or benefit from it.
Are there any other questions?
I'm going to ask a question that might not even make sense because I'm at a very different point in this journey than everybody.
Loud and proud. Loud and proud. I get it.
My little guy is getting ready to turn 3.
Oh.
We adopted him, so we're just starting this process.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure out the difference in everything. So for him, is it better to open like a savings account, or is it better to just go ahead and do an Abel's account with him being this little?
It depends on what's your purpose of the savings account.
Well, just a place like we have an adoption party and his birthday parties and things like that. Money has to go somewhere for him.
I would, if it's cash or is it checks written out to him?
No, it's cash.
Okay, if it's cash, I would probably open an account and the name in your names, in parents' names, put a beneficiary on that account. So when on your death, it goes into and the third-party special needs trust, which you have to set up. So I would set up a third-party special needs trust. I would have an account set up where the beneficiary on that account is the special needs trust. That way you keep it out of his name, but if something happens to you, it goes into a special needs trust.
Any other questions? Ricketts. I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out and listening, and I hope you found the information helpful. Again, you can check the boxes for more information, and then you can either hand it to our organizer here, and you can either scan and email those forms to me, or you can yourselves, take a picture with your phone or whatnot, and email it to email@rubinlaw.com, as you can see on the form itself. So one way or the other, get that form to us, and we will respond by emailing you the forms you need. So just fill out that form and whatever information you want, and we will respond.
I appreciate it, Benji.
You're very welcome. All right, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.